So ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to a very interesting topic right now. So I'm going to be moderating the session. So my name is Nitesh Singh. I lead Accenture's communications, media and technology practice. And for the last 2 decades or so, I've seen a lot of the operators grow across Africa. And I remember back then, almost every 20, 25 years, an industry reaches its inflection point. And I think that's happening right now. And, this is a topic raging across boardrooms, across the planet, across Africa. Telcos are not just connectivity providers. They're at a point where they're scaling to become much more than that. And what we're seeing now is the evolution of telecommunications companies worldwide. And what we're noticing is this evolution to a TechCo. And this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I just want to welcome my panelists onto the stage, please. And we're going to have a very interesting discussion around what they're seeing in their organization. So please, a round of applause for my panel members. All of them, very privileged to have our operators and some of our banks and our telecommunication providers join us this morning. Are we short of it? So you guys are going to squeeze in somewhere. It's fine. I'll stand. So morning, everybody. Maybe before we kick off, a quick introduction from our panel members, a little bit about where they come from and their organization. Maybe Todd, you want to kick off first?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. Todd Ashton. I'm from Ericsson here in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Hi, my name is Siyabonga Masangu. I'm with Telcoms SA.
Morning, Nina Triantis. I run Standard Bank's Global Telecoms Media and Technology Sector team.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Ashraf. I head up digital transformation for Celsi.
Good morning, everyone. Dan Kastelitz, Vodacom Group CTO.
Fantastic. Maybe Dayan, the first question to you. Your thoughts on why this telco to techco transition, this evolution makes sense for your organization. What are you seeing in the industry? What are you guys thinking about from a Vodacom perspective?
Thanks, Nitesh. So in Vodacom, together with our principal, Vodafone, we actually onboarded into a strategy called Tech 2025. And it's all about how do we diversify our revenues. When you think about it, 100% of the revenues from a connectivity business, and here in Africa, it's mainly into the mobile connectivity business. It's how do you offset and actually grow your revenues out of the connectivity business. The question is why? And I think it's very simple. But you have to have a hat of a so-called non-technologist, a business owner. If you look at the revenue growth into the connectivity business in the last couple of years, not to say even a decade, it's not really so growing anymore. It's more or less flat, or let me say single-digit growth, depending on the market. If you look at Europe usually grows single-digit or even flat in the last couple of years because of so-called unlimited offers. And the idea there is that they moved to unlimited offers. There are no more ARPU increases. It more or less follows the CPI, and that's it. Now, in the other parts of the globe, like here in Africa, we still have a possibility to actually organically grow through the lower penetration. But at the same time, if you want now to actually expand and grow again double digit, or if you want to grow, I would say double digit the shareholder returns, you have to look, into the whole value chain. And I always like to look on the value chain. What are we providing to our end customers? If you go back 2G, voice, messages, at that point of time, we were owning that value chain end to end. The customer were using messagings and the voice, done. But now, if you look with the 3G, 4G, 5G, you move to the data, you actually enable new businesses. You enable new products and services. And in that space, that revenue, you're not capturing, or that part of the value chain you're not capturing. So you become almost like a commodity. There is a huge debate for many years now, are we in a commodity business or not? And I don't want to go into that debate, but the whole idea is that our growth is actually very much limited into so-called connectivity business. Now, if you start looking, and we started looking here in Africa, and I have to say we are quite lucky comparing to like Europe, for an example, because we have one of the greatest fintech services called M-Pesa. And for us, that's that part of the value chain, which is actually outside of the connectivity business. It's the part where you're providing new service or additional service, sort of like an OTT fintech space, and we're actually growing that more than double digit. But not only that, I think the important part to understand is why we want to move as well, because you add that stickiness layer. So you want to run your connectivity business as the best of the best, the most efficient, the best of the best connectivity, best of the best customer experience, and at the same time, adding new service is going to add that stickiness to your customers. And I think that's the important part as well. You have then the IoT, you have all the IT services that you want to offer. We have in our example from Mezzanine, it's one of our subsidiaries. We provide connected farmers. So you have the portfolio of different services which you can actually then offer as this so-called non-connectivity business. Let me just try to wrap it up. As Vodacom now, we are on a level of 17, almost 18% outside of our non-core mobile services, which means that it's growing into that space. Tech 2025 as a joint target with our principal Vodafone, it's to grow that into 20 or 25% even in the next couple of years. And that's the space that I believe, Nitesh, it's very important for us as a telco to think about it, because it's not only about the shareholder returns, but it's also providing the next level of experience to our customers, simply merging and actually adding those connectivities together.
Absolutely, Dan. I think there's fascinating insights. I think, as you embark on this journey, though, and Siyabonga, I want to bring this to you from a telecom perspective. Over the years, there's been a lot of restructuring of the business, and from a regulatory perspective, as you trying to pivot to a TechCo, how are you guys thinking about it from a telecom perspective, especially the regulatory side?
Yes, perhaps let me emphasize the regulatory side, because that will help us as operators to think of this. The biggest thing that change brings, it questions your flexibility. So that's where we need to emphasize how adaptable are you as an operator in this new environment. I mean, in the last 10 years or so, we've had a lot of cries about the shifting profit pools from operators to what is called the tech companies, or OTTs as others call them. And we also had concerns from governments on the shifting balance of payments and the migration of tax revenues from the emerging economies to the developed economies. So that's where you find ourselves as an operator in a developing economy. So how do you then evolve when the environment is lagging behind? Because invariably you will find that you are discussing complex partnerships between an operator and a hyperscaler, where that hyperscaler is an international player and is not licensed in your country and is not dealt with within the traditional confines of your regulation or policies and so on. How do you deal with that? So what then it tells us is that there is this new environment. So sharing of infrastructure in the new environment needs to be redefined completely. We also see that a lot happens across sectors, whether it's an intersection between broadcasting and telcos, and then you're like, okay, so how do I deal with this? They don't really have spectrum, but they want to sell this, and then maybe they don't have an IECNS, that's what we call it in South Africa, an infrastructure license, same as yours, but they want to play in that area. How does that work? And then you start saying, those are things that slow us down. So the infrastructure sharing dispensation needs to be flexible. It needs to be enabling to the new environment. But also, we need to, what we learn from fintech or payment systems and so on, and that intersection between technology, telco, and financial services, we see that it's easier for the financial services company to play into that space than it is for a telco. But then what is really holding telco back? We need to then see if there's any need to liberalize some of the banking and financial services regulations to enable telco to play. Why we need, of course, there has to be checks and balances, but telco should be able to take investments. Telco should be able to accept deposits. Telco should be able to have freer payment systems using data or airtime as currency. So the way we think about currency in the emerging world, the way we think about payments and financial regulation should be able to free telco to be able to play in that space. At this point, you may be having 30 million subscribers. They exchange airtime or data as they wish. But when they have to exchange money, it's a problem. You have to have a partnership with a bank. Now, if you have your Visa card or MasterCard, you just leave South Africa, you don't have to do many things. You get across the border, you transact. But you cannot do that with telco services. Then you need roaming like a local. You need all sorts of regulations to support that. So I think it's time that we free up telco to be able to play beyond telco. So that's where I think in our approach to sharing, in our approach to services, we need to start lowering the barrier, or at least redefining what do we mean by beyond telco, and then allow the operators to be able to play in those spaces. And we need to be able to understand that what is called for right now, what we call transition from telco to TechCo, is actually deepening convergence and recreating the future. So let's allow the future to happen.
Absolutely. We need it to happen and fast. Nina, I want to bring you in here. What Sibonga was saying is fundamental, but you need a strategy to make this work, right? So, what are you seeing the journeys telcos are taking? What's the underlying strategies you guys are thinking about to make this work?
Yeah, sure. I think there are a number of sub-themes in this discussion. Because we see different telcos, different companies having slightly differing strategies in terms of their transition. I think the fintech conversation is pretty much one that everybody is pursuing. All the telcos, of course, are separating out their fintech businesses. It's not simple, actually, because the fintech business has always been effectively tied, to the rest of the mobile business, and I think that's going to take some time. And the different telcos, if you look at the big MNOs in Africa, Vodacom and the Vodafone family, if you will, MTN, Airtel, etc., are all in differing stages of implementing this strategy. There are also differences in terms of where that strategy goes, in terms of, does the telco want to be licensed like a bank? Partnerships, obviously, to achieve the strategy, and really what the various momos are doing is moving up the value chain, right? Because historically and still, the lion's share of the transactions are, peer-to-peer, cash in, cash out, and really moving up, that value chain in terms of offering financial services, remittances, et cetera, et cetera. So filling the gaps, either organically, which, can be quite difficult, by acquisition. Tech multiples historically very high, they've come down. Or partnerships. So that, so fintech is one, and there's been a fair bit of discussion already, around fintech. In terms of the rest, and I guess looking at the universe a little bit more broadly, not just the telcos. I mean, you've got the digital infrastructure players, you've got players like, Liquid, who are primarily more enterprise driven players and very clearly moving up the tech, the tech space. Having recently acquired, Telrad and focusing on data centers and cloud and cybersecurity, et cetera. But you're seeing this convergence. Vodacom taking a stake into CIVH, so quite a big focus by the telecoms players in terms of bolstering their digital infrastructure. Again, different strategies. I think towers have always been, as a passive infrastructure, always considered very passive. So telcos offloaded that infrastructure. Fiber appears to be quite key in terms of the strategy of the telcos, and telcos are again separating out their fiber infrastructure to unlock. Well, and the unlock value theme is very big, right? In terms of separating out your fintech, separating out your fiber, et cetera. And data centers, I think, again, the strategies vary. Up until now, they've been fit for purpose. They haven't really been commercialized in the way that a traditional data center operator commercializes. And some telcos feel they don't have the DNA to do that themselves. They're seeking partnerships. Others feel differently. So I guess I'll stop here. But there are a number of sub themes, and some players focus more on both the digital infrastructure and the services layer. Others being more more services oriented. Some pure digital infrastructure players thinking about moving up the layers, et cetera. So quite a lot of going on in the industry, and also in different parts of Africa. The evolution is quite different, right? So South Africa, very different to where the industry is, in the rest of Africa in this sort of transition.
No, thank you, Nina. I think it's fascinating. I think, very direct, pointed strategies you're talking about. But I think, what's fundamental as well is, we always talk about the culture of a business. How do you get the culture right? These are very good strategies, but if you ain't getting the culture right, you're not going to get this right. And Ashraf, I'd like you to comment on that. How important do you see the culture as you guys are pivoting to a TechCo?
Nitesh, if I can just give two introductory points. I think the one is that, it's one thing seeking incremental revenue and trying to see it, but you're never going to get that right if it's just a side strategy. And I think the one thing that Chelsea's done is taken the bold step to recognize that this TechCo thing that we're talking about is not going to lie in continuously investing in infrastructure, but in how you engage with customers and lifestyle and so forth. So, that shift has created in Chelsea a very strong tension of how do we operate in this new world, because we don't have that kind of, and I don't say baggage, but actually you have this mental load of how much effort you spend on it, and that's freed us up, I think, in the last 12 months of the journey we've been going through to kind of think of what is this TechCo, what is it, and so forth. And the second point is, it's one thing we seem to assume that the TechCo thing, and we use our own words, but is a thing that you're going to become. But actually, it's a way of working. It's a way of responding to markets. I'll give you a simple example. It's one thing thinking about how to connect, and we have a persona in our business when we do this planning stuff called Martha. It's one thing thinking about it. But if you're going to play in new revenue sources, you need to think about how Martha engages with a health ecosystem. And if you can find value there, that's how you think. So that thinking is absolutely critical. So what does it take? Listen, I don't know. It's a journey. But what I will tell you is we've done a couple of things very different. I've had the benefit of sitting across all the telcos. One is we flipped the model. Typically telcos want to build these services on the outside and they get the core business to enable. That doesn't work. Actually, I'm an enabler to the core business right now. I mean, from a digital transformation perspective, we've created a separate unit. The enablement piece happens in digital, and you will not believe the tension that causes, and fantastic tension, because for the first time you're starting to think like an e-commerce business and not a airtime distribution business. And it changes the way you want to see Martha and somebody else in the business. The second key thing we've done is that we've stopped thinking about these other services as add-ons. It's an extension of the thing. The simple fact is these are brands, these are lifestyle services that need their own life and their own oxygen and so forth. We spend lots of time thinking about each of these lifestyle elements. And the last thing, and I think that probably the most fundamental part of this TechCo thing is scaling. And that's why the opening sentence I'll give you is that I think there's no better fit for what Africa is and the opportunity it presents than the TechCo way of working. How do you take one person and scale it across 50 million people in your organization? Find a service that's relevant, not having to have these huge barriers that the old model had. How do you partner and bring them into your ecosystem that you have with an ease that we have? In the last 3 months, I think we've kind of signed up about just north of 11 partnerships. Can you imagine a telco? I remember telcos usually have an 18-month life cycle for that. So that way of shifting and thinking, but also moving forward, I think is going to be the key to what makes this TechCo thing come alive. What those business models are, I think we've taken 1 or 2 big steps to just recognize that the old business model and the return on invested capital on that thing is not sustainable.
No, fantastic thoughts, Ashraf. I think you need that healthy tension to make this work in the business. But, I think, and Todd, coming to you here, I think what's also critical, to get this right, this is technology we're talking about, this is software we're talking about, this is software centers of excellence we're talking about. And we have a big skills problem, right? To get this right, you need skills. Any thoughts, Todd?
Yeah, thanks. I think the TechCo journey, is well described by the journey we've gone on as a managed services player in the industry. When we first did it, it was very people-intensive, typical engineers, civil works, all this kind of stuff. Now we've moved into a model where we built some hubs across Africa, and then it's rather a software business that is enhancing the skills of some very advanced engineers, right? So you can do things using artificial intelligence, etc. And I think that skills journey is the same thing that's needed to enable these different new businesses that are coming. But we face a problem, if I can, let's say, push the envelope a little bit, and that is the freedom of movement of labor around the continent. So if you work in a multinational, you want to be able to build a diversity of skills of people with diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences. And part of that would be being able to freely work in different countries, because typically, with the exception of maybe Nigeria or South Africa, you don't get enough scale in any one country to really take someone through the skill development curves. You need to be able to move them around. Otherwise, you can't give, for example, day on a good service, right? So I think that's something that I believe is still not cracked. Maybe the model of today, which is what we're using, is kind of this hub model where you can find a good way of working. But I think that's something that regulation will need to evolve in order to support the journey that they're on.
Oh, fantastic. I know, Dejan, your skills is close to your heart, and talent and training. Any thoughts on these software skills that we need?
Yeah, thanks, Nitesh. So in our case, what we're building so-called center of excellence is now depending on the domain. Let me just give 2 examples. M-Pesa, in 2020, we actually formed a company called M-Pesa Africa. We moved all of the skills from different markets into that one hub. And that one hub is now developing all the new features, all the new products on top of the M-Pesa as a product. We have M-Pesa now in 6-7 markets in our footprint. And then ideally, you actually roll them out more or less in a one space, meaning I develop it once, use it then multiple times. From that point of view, center is in Kenya, but we also have a company here in South Africa, and depending then on the skills availability, we actually hire people. There's going to be a new addition in our Voda family here in Africa, which is actually Egypt. And Egypt we see as a special hub again on the IT services, software engineering, coding skills to be actually used in the future. But again, the idea there is, depending on the skill availability per market, depending on the domain which you want to insource in actually software engineering space, we're looking at sort of like a center of excellence capability, we build it, but then that center of excellence uses and actually exports the capabilities into the other countries. It goes very nicely then also with standardization. We're also looking at the standardization of all of different domains and parts of the telco or the TechCo, if you can call it like that, into other countries, more or less looking through the lens of one Africa, but not anymore 6, 7, 8, 9 countries.
So I'm actually going to bring another one up for you, Dan. You know, as you know, it's been very capital intensive for all the operators. And there's always this conundrum about Capex, Opex trends. And how do you get this right? How do you see this playing out?
See, that's an interesting question. And every single year, when we are in the budgeting process, when you talk with the finance people, they always say, we will budget for it, right? We will have exceptions. Whatever you move from an on-prem solution into the cloud, whatever you move from, again, having a managed services, which you can easily capitalize almost 100%, into insourcing, where your capitalization level is lower, we will find an exception. But when you hit the ground, when you hit the financial year, it's always about the pressure in the Opex, always about the pressure on the EBITDA. And then that's a different discussion. But what we're seeing now is that the more you move to the cloud, the more you move to actually have more elasticity in the cloud, you have that Opex pressure. And as a company, we are continuously developing and actually learning how to actually manage those capabilities in a better fashion so that your Opex intensity or your Opex cost stays pretty much at the same level, so you can still develop the profitability, the returns, which are actually expected. I would say on the other parts, we are also looking, and I think somebody mentioned, I think Nina, we're also spinning off the companies, like a separate company subsidiary, because in that space, that limitation goes away.
Right.
Then the analysts, they're looking through different lenses. That's a telco business. We understand, again, revenues, Opex, EBITDA, you know, those relations. But then I look at the fintech, I understand it's much more labor-intensive business. And from that point of view, they have a different lens. So we're taking different approaches. And you know, all in all, we're trying to find the best possible approach for us, looking at our specific organization, specific, I would say, services that we're actually having and products to actually have the best shareholder returns.
Fantastic. You know, Siyabonga, you make me think earlier, and Todd, this is actually for you, but how do you think that the Capex that the telcos are going to put into this, or the investment they're going to put into this, compares to the hyperscalers of the world?
Yeah, well, so I think Dejan just highlighted a little bit, I mean, what happens from an Opex perspective, because, I mean, it's typically an Opex model that we're talking about. And, you know, I went through this sort of 4G journey in Southeast Asia and saw how, yeah, I mean, so many different new unicorns popped up once people got access to 4G and 5G. I mean, Nick was talking about broadband in the morning, right? So, and I believe the hyperscales play a big role there. However, if, let's say, I mean, Dejan, I think you guys spent, I don't know, 14.5 billion rand in Capex or something, bought spectrum for 5 billion. You know, if mobile operators are not given the right, let's say, regulatory environment where you have certainty of license renewal, where you can easily change technology using the spectrum for, so you can build out, you know, fiber in combination with mobile broadband, which will be very important for this continent. I mean, that's going to be the last mile solution. Nothing that the hyperscalers do and bring to Africa is going to happen. I mean, they can invest all they want, but without the connectivity, I mean, those services, the diversity of business that Dan was talking about, they want to bring, it's not going to happen. So I think that fundamental plumbing, if you will, needs to be in place for the water to flow.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, Ashraf, we were talking earlier about ecosystems and partners and how important is it on this journey you're on. How important is the ecosystem to you guys?
I think ecosystems is an overused word. The simple fact is that if in this new TechCo world, it's an open world. If you're not bringing in as many partners into the thing, you're not seeing them as one-on-one relationships. We had an interesting conversation a couple of weeks back that says, okay, which insurer are you going to work with? And the simple fact is, if you just go with one, you're not creating an ecosystem. You're restricting that particular relationship to a very binary thing. So the idea that you kind of create the enabling tools and the economic models to partner with various players in the industry and then to trigger access that never previously existed is a shift in the way the operator or the TechCo seems itself. Here we're an enabler. How do I bring you in? We've had a very silly example recently about handset deliveries. Why can't I open up Apple to sell right through to my customer base in an open way just as much as I do Samsung? Why do I have to go buy the thing? It's a very different way of seeing how you set up ecosystems in a different way, because telco have probably one of the best assets in the industry. They're bigger than most banks. Even us at our level are bigger than most of the banks. We have an audience who have real needs. They need reach. We have ability to create the security and the other things around them. How do we enable the other ecosystems to fire off? So in our minds, we see ecosystems as a way of rethinking most of the old models and how you create links between the two, and what our role is from a branding, from a service and a feature perspective.
Fantastic. Sibong, I'd like you to pick up on ecosystems as well from a telecom perspective, a very big part of your organization. But we're going through this journey now to TechCos. How do you guys see ecosystems playing out?
Well, I think the issue here is that as a traditional telco, you always wanted to maintain control. And in the new world, it's a world of partnerships. And it's partnerships not only between suppliers and telcos, or partnerships with customers or channels, but it's partnerships across sectors. So now you have to think much more broadly, and you have to try and open up. Now the thinking is much more about what you can do together rather than you issuing an RFP. So we're now in that world. But that world also creates one other complexity. Some people own more data than others. Some people then trade that data. Somebody else, there's the Competition Commission right now is grappling about how this data that either it's with the bigger international tech companies or those that reside with the telcos or so on, how does that get shared? How is that regulated? So I think in that cooperation, we're going to find that we need then to redefine the levels of cooperation or coopetition, right? So, and also we then will see that as you're talking about cloud and you're talking about a lot of this discussion on transition to TechCo is calling for some form of review of how asset heavy you should be as a TechCo. And therefore, the rules that we have that regulates M&As or regulates how the corporate actions should be able to be flexible and expedient and fast enough to allow the spinning of those assets that you need to spin off, or to invite partners in those parts of your business that you think require you to partner, so that you can have the flexibility you need to be a TechCo. At this moment, I mean, more or less, you're looking at 18 months to do a deal, to 24. That doesn't work for an industry like ours. You need to be slightly much more agile and faster. So I think that if we want to create these partnerships, we want to have this ecosystem to work, we then need an agile regulatory and policy environment to be able to carry that.
Absolutely. So I think unlocking this intrinsic value, and Nina, I want to come to you on this. To make this work, you need a sound operating model. You're going to need to, structure this in a certain way. Any thoughts on what that could be?
Yeah, and I guess it kind of varies, depending upon what we're talking about, right? So, and coming back to the, to all the buzzwords, whether it's ecosystems or platforms or or everything else. I liked what Ashraf said earlier, because we've also seen a lot of situations where just a mere partnership doesn't actually deliver what one is wanting to gain, and you've seen in the fintech space, as an example, the likes of MasterCard and Visa have invested in just about every fintech in Africa, and the idea was always that that investment was going to bring about some form of cooperation and partnership and some value creation. And in a lot of cases, 2-3 years on, not a lot has happened. So, how one drives this is, and I don't think it's a one size fits all. It really depends also on what the strategy is, what each operator really chooses to focus on. Again, like I said earlier, not everybody, focuses exactly, in terms of this transition in the same way. So separation is a big theme. Carve-out's a very big theme, primarily in the infrastructure space, fiber, potentially data centers, and of course fintech. I'll start with the last one. We see M-Pesa, who are really at the forefront of this mobile-led revolution in payments and services, creating and co-creating quite a lot of the technology stack rather than sort of taking from somewhere else, and of course partnering with banks, right, like us, who will provide balance sheet or some financial services, to the M-Pesa customers, and then there's always the debate about who owns the data because guess what? We banks also want to own the data, and we want to do some of the same things that the telcos are doing, but I'm not really going to go into that. So you've got, do you do M&A, right? And if you do M&A, do you look to integrate as soon as you've done the M&A or shortly thereafter with the rest of your business? Do you allow the entity to operate alongside you, particularly if the entity has a different culture, DNA that doesn't particularly fit with the rest of the organization? So it's very difficult to say one is right and the other one is wrong. But we also spoke about skills earlier and about culture. And I would say in some segments, the innovation, like in the fintech world and the payments world, the innovation coming out of Africa is amazing. And is actually, there's more innovation coming out of Africa at the moment than any other part of the world. When you look at, say, cloud services, right? Or software development, those sorts of things. I think it's also quite difficult, and I think Nick spoke about this, having companies that achieve unicorn status in the kind of true software tech world. It's quite difficult to compete with the big techs of the world, right? I mean, most telcos are resellers of the Azure platform, et cetera. It's quite difficult to do that. And also, I think, and I'm diverging a little bit here, the telcos could benefit from cooperating more amongst them and creating more of an open system, whether it's the fintech world, but that's quite difficult because you've got, big companies with, their own cultures, et cetera, et cetera. But coming back to the question, so separation is a big, value unlock. But you will hear that the say, call it GSM part of the business sometimes doesn't favor that because then it impacts their Opex, model. But there, the telcos, again, differs, are looking to bring in both financial partners. You asked the question before about investment, to help with that, because the investment is big. So there's quite a lot going on in that respect to bring in financial partners. But potentially, in some cases, to bring in a strategic partner, not just as a partner, but somebody that invests, potentially even takes control of part of your, digital infrastructure, and really, helps you commercialize that part of your business.
Right.
And again, it's the operating model is that everyone chooses is going to be fundamental in terms of the execution of the strategy, because it's all about execution, and not chasing a higher valuation, which is also a very, very big objective in this whole exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's, I think of it as the connectivity conundrum we're facing now. Because you need to also think about diversifying revenues, or should you not? So maybe, Dan, I want to ask you about, diversifying your revenues. There's fintech, there's commerce, there's payments, there's lots of marketplaces. Like, what are your thoughts? What is Vodacom thinking about?
Thanks. Let me just quickly, I would like to respond to a couple of points in a positive fashion. So I also believe that the next wave for the telcos is actually all about partnerships, and in different forms. So one form would be, we have so many plans, such a big ambition, and we cannot do everything by ourselves.
Correct.
So we are searching now for partners. We mentioned the FiberCo, we mentioned the TowerCo, we mentioned many different data center costs, many different costs. We don't have the cash. We don't have even the capability to do all of that. So what we are doing now, we're searching partners actually to do the co-investment. FiberCo, for example, is one that we are doing now in Vodacom, trying to build the fiber across the footprint of Africa. Second part would be, you have the business, you run it, but it's a sideshow. So a good example would be the TowerCo. In our case, in South Africa, we are carving it out now. We're going to run as a standalone business, professional management, tenancy ratio, support and maintenance costs, those couple of KPIs, but 100% focus. So make that as a flying business. I think the third pillar is, when you have those platforms, different platforms, what do you do there? You also want to open them. So even on the TowerCo, we're not saying we want to close it, we want to open it. We are happy to have new partners onboarding into the TowerCo, or new partners onboarding into different fintech spaces, to actually work with them and provide those new services which are not there, having a 20, 30, 40, 50% of the share than nothing. So I think partnership is very, very important going forward. Now, to your original question, getting that 20, 25% or even higher, all the way to 50, that would actually bring us as a telco to a TechCo, looking purely from a financial point of view. But actually together, we mentioned many, many different points, many different milestones. How do we get there? And I think in my opinion, it's not so simple. We are living that in Africa. I think very lucky to have fintech platforms like M-Pesa, like VodaPay, many different opportunities to provide services like Connected Farmer, which is not something that's being provided in more advanced markets, where you can actually diversify your revenue portfolio into those new services. I think bigger challenge is going to be in more advanced markets, because in that space, it's very hard to find an opportunity into the new business and actually start building it from scratch. I think big plus also for Africa, when you talk about M-Pesa, it's in multiple markets. It's sort of like you cannot call it like a Google global platform, but it's global platform in the markets where Vodacom operates. And I think that's also one of the advantages that we have, looking at the needs of our customers, users, people here in Africa, that we are actually then providing and serving.
Absolutely. Sibonga, Telkom diversifying your revenue, and how do you guys see it?
Yeah, I mean, we started a long time ago. As we are busy discussing this, it took me back to around 15 years ago, when Telkom mooted the takeover or acquisition of BCX, Business Connection at the time. And the thinking at that time was, we are going to have to transition into something that we all did not know what it looks like. But we know that there will be an interplay between technology, IT, ICT, and traditional telco. And we've been proven correct. And right now, I'm sure you've seen the announcement that BCX has done a commercial deal with Alibaba on the cloud. And that is bringing closer to the realization of this TechCo story. And I'm sure you've also listened to our results when we're thinking about more advanced partnerships. I think it was in our 2020 half-year or interim results when we're saying we now need to think about how this business looks like going forward in its different facets. And we started by realizing some of that by having a very dedicated real estate company to make sure that we get the value for our shareholders on that. And we then also said, okay, in that real estate, we have identified our masts and towers and ran them separately. And now you can see the trend, right? So in some way, we are quite pathfinders in that kind of world, and the thinking is quite advanced on how this will look like in the future. And I think that while we're all grappling with this in the continent and trying to think about how this works, it is necessary that the regulators also start having a forward-looking approach. Because when the first BCX transaction was blocked by the competition authorities,
remember that.
they were thinking backwards. The assessment was retrospect. They were looking from where things were working at the time and before. They did not look at how the evolution is taking place and what's going to happen in the future. And I think that if regulatory philosophy starts looking at the future, we will be in a good space.
Absolutely. Ashraf, new revenue streams for you guys? What do you think?
We see two parts to that. I think what traditionally, for example, particularly the MVNOs and so forth are normally seen as customers, we've turned that model around and we're looking how we can help them in a slightly different way. So essentially, those as much as they are coming on board as like Capex and so forth as MVNOs, in fact, the nature of the relationship is fundamentally different. It's much more kind of diversifying his own role in that ecosystem and helping enable them. And watch the space. I think we spend a lot of time trying to go to new places now that we've ditched the old ones.
Lovely. Todd, we're getting to the end now, but to make this all happen, we got 4G, 5G, all playing out at the same time. And as you see this transformation happening, and Ericsson's at the heart of this, how do you see the different spectrums rolling out as we make this evolutionary jump?
Yeah, so I think my experience from Southeast Asia was in any one country, once you got to about 20% penetration for, let's say, 4G, that was sort of like, then the network effect would kick in, and then you would see the curve go like that. And it was 7% when I came in August 2020. It's now around 20% for Sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
I think we'll see it accelerate. And that's really important because that'll be the you need that 4G layer to make 5G work, right? And then I think just to tie back into the new revenue stream, I think Nick did my presentation this morning in a way. What will happen in Africa, that the last mile will, in many cases, need to be mobile. So the mobile operators have a wonderful opportunity, what's called fixed wireless access. Using 5G as a way to deliver fiber in the air. But the other thing, so diversifying all these digital businesses is given, let's say, if Dayon's investing 14.5 billion rand, how do we make sure that they're able to get the return on that value while making the open environment for the innovation that's clearly exists in Africa, which is probably the most advanced. And that's why we've acquired this company called Vonage, which already has an extensive API platform with more than 1 million developers. Today maybe they buy voice and SMS in bulk from operators, but the idea is to get all that innovation leveraging all the infrastructure investments that the mobile operators are making, so that you get that innovation going and create the new revenue stream. So that's the whole logic behind that. And I think that when we talk about 5G is going to be super important. And I think that will allow operators to invest more. It will bring the cost per gigabit way down. That drives financial inclusion for everyone, and I think will provide a strong stimulus for the economies here.
Awesome. So I think, in closing, maybe each one of you, 30 seconds, as you make this move towards the TechCo, what do you see, what do you want to see happening from your perspective?
So Vodacom, I would say it's super exciting. I think in our case is more how do we enhance our platforms which are already existing and actually grow them to the next level. In terms of the core business, like it or not, it has to be there. It's a cash cow for now. Right. I don't want to use that word, but that's in reality what's happening. And as I already mentioned, you want to have that core business, core connectivity business, best of the best, most optimized. How I look at the telco business, it's more like you have the part which is called construction, then you have the part which is called operations, and then you have the part which is called procurement. And if you get those three very nicely optimized, you will get a very solid cash out of that one, but stable. And then I think everything about partnerships, and again, the measures that I actually just shared, it's something's going to be carved out, professional management. When you want to add new wealth management into your fintech platforms, you're going to have a partnership with somebody bringing that wealth management, but then you're going to actually provide this to all of your customers. So it's those couple of elements that I see it's very important now for us going into the next couple of years to enhance them and to grow them.
Wonderful. Ashraf?
I think in closing, I'll say two things. I think one is what this industry is going to look like in the next few years is going to be very different. I think the types of skill you're going to hire, the types of way you're going to operate, and the way you're going to be forced to operate, I think is going to change. And from that perspective, the holiday is over for the telcos, and I can say that with all due respect. The second comment is, I guess, more a reflection of what's happened here. I think we're using the word open and partnership quite often. I think, yes, one being open for your towers, but are you open for what I think Nina was trying to go, for your services, for your enablement layers, so even other companies can pop in on top and be able to enable that. Because to be honest, any service that one of the operators launch, your hands are half tied because you can only serve your customers. Whereas there's 50 million South Africans or 1 billion Africans. That's the key question, is can you open that up in a way that allows a mutually symbiotic relationship? That's partnership and open relationships in a TechCo world.
Wow. Nina?
Obviously, I'm not a telco, I'm a bank, but you know, we have our own obviously ambitions and digital journey, and we've spoken publicly quite a bit about ecosystems and platforms and such like. What I would say is it's really difficult, and there, you know, probably changes along the way because execution is hard. But I think going back to a couple of points, the telcos do still have an advantage, and in some markets, you know, the big telcos are quite dominant, and sometimes perhaps too dominant, and the regulators and the taxmen don't like that, of course, and I think there'll continue to be that, you know, that pressure. So one does have to focus on their core, make sure that, you know, continues to pump, while figuring out the best way to execute, you know, on the journey, and again, not necessarily, you know, there has been a lot of focus on, you know, how do I achieve a higher valuation, right? I mean, it's not just about, at the end of the day, if one executes in the right way, etc., then the lift in valuation will come, and one has seen it in announcements, right? Separating out assets, and, you know, prices go up, and then of course prices go down again because not much has happened in the meantime. It's all about, you know, execution and protecting the core in the meantime.
Lovely. Siyabonga?
I think as Telkom, we've been part of this transformation journey for quite a while. We've seen a movement from copper to fiber. We've seen a movement from fixed to mobile. We've seen a transition from an emphasis moving from your voice to data. And as we are now transitioning, I think the experience that we can take from all of that is that as you're rewriting the rules of the future, you should not do it out of fear. You should do it out of understanding and be evidence-based. So allow the future to direct you a little bit. Let it mold you a little bit. So as we go on, we will need. I mean, it's easy in the boardroom for all of us to look at different business strategies, but we think that also in the echelons of government and regulators, it is important that that kind of agility, flexibility, it's also infused in their thinking. So let's allow the future to mold itself. We don't know what the future holds, but what we know is that it's got massive possibilities.
Absolutely. Todd?
Yeah, just to maybe try to wrap it up, I guess. But I mean, we know that for every 1,000 broadband connections, 80 new jobs are created. We know if you double the speed of mobile broadband, the GDP growth will be somewhere between 0.8% and 2.3%. We know, like in a farming community, Dan spoke about it, the longer the woman of the household has a smartphone, the higher the disposable income will be for the family. So these are kind of important things. I think any president of any country would want that to happen to their economy and drive that financial inclusion. And for me, to make this innovation happen that they were talking about, it's so important to create regulatory environments where spectrum is not thought of as an ATM machine. You can renew the licenses with some certainty. They are technology neutral. We're able to develop an African workforce with a diverse background because we can move them around. I think if those things are in place, everything that we were speaking about will certainly happen, and I'm sure more.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much, guys. So we'll kick off the next session shortly.